The soft thrum of server racks was my lullaby, a constant, comforting heartbeat in the hushed cathedral of my digital domain. Here, within these four walls, shielded by layers of encrypted air and the intricate weave of my own making, I was sovereign. My world was a galaxy of glowing interfaces, a constellations of data streams that obeyed my touch, my thought. I moved through lines of code like a diver through bioluminescent waters, each character a living thing, responding to my will. User TM, the name I chose for this digital ghost, was a whisper of genius, known only to those who truly understood the subtle artistry of a perfectly secured network, or the devastating elegance of one expertly breached. My reclusive nature was not a burden, but a fortress built brick by virtual brick, against the chaotic, unpredictable outside. Tonight, the usual symphony of my sanctuary was disturbed by an alien chord, a flicker barely perceptible on a peripheral screen, a rogue pixel that refused to vanish. My fingers, accustomed to a ballet of precision across the keyboard, paused. It was an anomaly, a single discordant note in an otherwise flawless composition. My focus narrowed, the world outside my screens fading to an irrelevant blur. I traced its origins, not with alarm, but with the detached curiosity of a craftsman observing a flaw in a masterpiece. But this was no flaw. It was an intrusion, a deliberate, calculated breach. Not a brute force attack, easily swatted, but something far more insidious, a subtle whisper slipping past my carefully constructed defenses. My system, the very extension of my intellect, was echoing a foreign presence. Then, a new window blossomed across my primary display, opaque and stark against the familiar blues and greens of my custom OS. No sender ID, no digital signature I could trace, just a single block of text, stark white on black, a testament to its anonymous sender's confidence. User TM, or should I say Marcus Thorne? The words were a physical blow, sucking the air from my lungs. Marcus Thorne was a phantom, a name shed years ago, buried so deep beneath layers of digital misdirection and physical relocation that its resurrection here now felt like a violation of my very soul. My fingers clenched, nails digging into my palms. This wasn't some casual hacker. This was someone who had peeled back every layer, someone who had seen the ghost behind the machine, the man behind the myth. Below the name, a hyperlink. Against every instinct, against the screaming alarm bells in my mind, I clicked. A cascade of images and documents flooded the screen, each one a shard of my past, meticulously collected and arranged. Bank statements from a defunct account I thought long erased. Photographs, grainy but unmistakable, of me at moments I considered utterly private, years ago in places I hadn't visited in a decade. A scan of a forgotten birth certificate. The blackmailer had not just found the keys to my kingdom, they had excavated the very foundations of my existence. This wasn't just data, this was my life laid bare. Then the second message appeared, overlaying the incriminating gallery, its words sharp as razor wire. We need your particular talent. User TM, a digital heist. Against an organization that considers itself unbreachable, you will orchestrate it. My breath hitched. An organization that considered itself unbreachable. In my world, that usually meant one thing: immense power, vast resources, and a reach that extended far beyond the digital realm. My mind, ever the analytical engine, began to churn, assessing probabilities, calculating risks. The task was not just difficult, it was, by any reasonable measure, impossible. Refusal is not an option. Your current existence, your carefully crafted anonymity, your very freedom depends on your cooperation. We have anticipated your every countermove, User TM. We know your patterns. They did know. The meticulousness of their blackmail proved it. My reclusive nature, once my shield, was now my greatest vulnerability. They had found the threads of my past and woven them into a leash. A final line appeared, a command that shattered the last vestiges of my self-imposed isolation. Instructions for my immediate departure are attached. A car will arrive at 0300. Be ready. My gaze drifted to the digital clock in the corner of my screen. 02:17. Less than an hour. My sanctuary, my meticulously built fortress, was crumbling around me. The images of my past, still flickering on the screen, were a potent reminder. I walked to the window, pulling back the heavy blackout curtain. Outside, the world was a canvas of inky black, dotted by the distant, indifferent lights of a city I rarely visited. It felt vast, menacing. At precisely 0300, a sleek black sedan, impossibly silent, glided to a stop outside my remote dwelling. The sedan's interior was plush, soundproofed, severing me completely from the world I knew. The landscape outside became a blur of indistinct shapes, dark trees against a slightly less dark sky. My mind raced, trying to parse the enormity of what I was being forced to do, the identity of the puppet masters, the nature of the target. Each unanswered question tightened the knot of tension in my gut. Finally, the car slowed, then turned onto a rough, unpaved track. Ahead through the gloom, I discerned the faint outline of structures, long and low. We pulled to a stop beside a small, private jet, its engines a silent, hulking promise of distant destinations. The metallic gleam of its fuselage was the only truly reflective surface in the pre-dawn gloom. This was it then, my new reality. Above, the first faint blush of dawn painted the eastern horizon, but here, on this desolate private airstrip in remote location, it felt like the world was still trapped in an endless night. My hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. If I was to be played, I would play with a vengeance. I would survive this. I had to. The digital clock's luminous green digits mocked me with their relentless march, 0217. The server hum, a lullaby for years, now thrummed with a predatory edge. My sanctuary, once impenetrable, felt like a glass house under siege. I rose, my frame a lattice of aches, the lingering phantom of a threat still clinging to my skin. Sleep was a forgotten luxury, a distant shore I dared not approach. Instead, I plunged back into the glowing abyss of my screens. The blackmail's shadow stretched long, but within its cold embrace, a flicker of my old self ignited. This was a puzzle, a monstrous, life-threatening enigma, yet still a puzzle. My fingers danced across the keyboard, a familiar ballet of keystrokes. I pulled up schematics, satellite imagery, corporate filings, anything I could scrape from the public-facing internet about Ethelred Corp. The initial intelligence provided by my unseen tormentor was sparse, a skeletal framework. It was my task to flesh it out, to breathe digital life into the target. My main monitor displayed a complex network topology, a spiderweb of nodes and pathways. I began mapping potential ingress points, not just the obvious external firewalls, but the less visible backdoors, the forgotten administrative portals, the human element vulnerabilities. Each line, each junction represented a heartbeat, a potential weakness in the corporation's digital bloodstream. I saw the network not as wires and signals, but as a living organism, breathing data in and out, vulnerable to infection. I traced hypothetical attack vectors, anticipating every countermeasure, every honeypot, every digital tripwire. Hours blurred into a singular, intense focus. My mind, usually a quiet, analytical engine, now raced, synthesizing vast oceans of information into actionable intelligence. I felt the familiar thrill of the chase, a dangerous exhilaration mixed with the bitter taste of coercion. This wasn't about discovery, it was about survival. The first glimmers of dawn painted the sky in bruised purples and grays when my secure line, a bespoke encryption I'd built myself, chirped. It was a sterile, clipped voice devoid of inflection. User TM, prepare for transport. Coordinates will be sent. Do not deviate. The line went dead. No pleasantries, no explanation, just an order. The puppet strings tightened. The coordinates led me to a remote corner of the map, a place where the roads dissolved into gravel tracks and the trees stood sentinel over forgotten landscapes. A single-engine turboprop, its paint dulled by countless sunrises, waited on a desolate stretch of asphalt. This was the private airstrip in remote location. A low-slung black sedan, its windows tinted to obsidian, sat idling beside the aircraft. As I approached, a figure emerged from the sedan's passenger side. Tall, slender, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that seemed out of place in this wilderness. He carried himself with an unnerving stillness. His eyes, when they met mine, were like chips of polished obsidian, reflecting nothing, revealing less. User TM, he stated, his voice a low thrum, neither question nor greeting. He gestured towards the plane. We have much to discuss. This was the strategist, I presumed, the architect of my current predicament. I boarded the small aircraft, the interior surprisingly plush, a stark contrast to the utilitarian exterior. The strategist settled opposite me, his gaze unwavering. Beside him, a hulking individual with forearms like knotted oak sat impassively, his presence a silent, undeniable threat. A sense of profound unease settled over me, heavy as the morning mist. These were not colleagues, they were overseers, wardens. Ethelred Corp, the strategist began, his voice cutting through the drone of the plane's engines as we lifted off, is not merely a data center, user TM. That is a convenient facade. Beneath the surface, it functions as a highly specialized research and development hub for advanced biogenetics and proprietary energy solutions. The data I am tasked to extract is not just financial records or intellectual property. It's the very core of their operational infrastructure, the blueprints for technologies that could reshape global power structures. My mind raced, connecting new dots to the skeletal framework I'd built. Biogenetics, energy solutions. This wasn't a simple corporate espionage job. It was something far more dangerous, a heist of existential significance. The digital fortress I had begun to map now seemed to hide a deeper, more volatile secret. The initial intel, I realized, had been deliberately misleading, a mere appetizer. "We need the complete schematics of their Nexus project," the strategist continued, producing a tablet from his briefcase. He slid it across the small table between us. On the screen, a three-dimensional rendering rotated slowly. It depicted a sprawling, multi-layered complex, far more extensive than any data center I had ever seen. There were subterranean levels, shielded research wings, and even what appeared to be self-contained living quarters. The Nexus is their crown jewel, a self-sustaining ecosystem of innovation. My task is to penetrate its central nervous system, bypass their quantum-encrypted data vaults, and extract everything related to Nexus, specifically their source code for the Chrysalis Protocol. Chrysalis Protocol. The name resonated with an unsettling biological implication. My gaze drifted from the screen to the strategist, then to the silent enforcer, whose eyes, though unmoving, seemed to hold a world of suppressed violence. I was no longer merely a hacker. I was an instrument in a game I barely understood, a game with stakes far beyond any I had ever imagined. Retreat was not an option. The web had already spun too tightly around me. My sanctuary was gone, my freedom a distant memory. The drone of the auxiliary generators hummed a low, metallic dirge through the repurposed hangar, a stark contrast to the desolate silence of the private airstrip in remote location that stretched beyond its corrugated walls. My fingers, a blur of motion across the illuminated console, danced with a familiar, almost surgical precision. The strategist stood to my left, a shadow of impatient anticipation, while the enforcer, a silent monolith, guarded the heavy door. His presence a constant, chilling reminder of my involuntary servitude. "Chrysalis Protocol," I murmured, the words feeling like ash on my tongue, even as I navigated the labyrinthine digital corridors of the target network. This wasn't merely a data extraction. It felt like an intrusion into something far more volatile, something alive and dangerous. I was a ghost in the machine, slipping past digital sentinels, bypassing layers of encryption designed to repel armies. The target system, a fortress of data belonging to the clandestine organization, began to yield. I felt the familiar thrill of the chase, the intellectual high of bending an impossible system to my will, momentarily overshadowing the gnawing fear. "Access granted," I announced, my voice a low rasp. A surge of exhilaration, brief and fragile, coursed through me. On a secondary display, a progress bar crawled, indicating the secure transfer of the core data packet. The strategist gave a curt nod, a flicker of something almost like approval in his eyes. The enforcer remained unmoving, a statue carved from granite. Success felt imminent, a bitter victory I longed to complete so I could retreat to the solitude of my own digital sanctuary, far from these unsettling faces. Then the first tremor. A flicker, not on my primary console, but on a smaller, discrete screen near the strategist's elbow. A burst of static, a momentary distortion of an image I couldn't quite discern. My gaze snapped to it, a prickle of unease snaking up my spine. Before I could question it, a sudden, violent shiver ran through the entire network I was manipulating. The cascading green lines on my screen stuttered, then froze. "What was that?" I demanded, my voice sharp with alarm. The strategist's face remained impassive, almost serene. "Continue user TM. A minor fluctuation." But it was no fluctuation. A new hostile signature bloomed within the target system, an invasive entity I hadn't deployed, a virulent strain of code that seemed to devour the very pathways I had meticulously carved. The progress bar on the data transfer halted, then reversed, its green fading to an ominous red. Alarms, not from my console but from the organization's network, began to wail, a distant, digital scream echoing through the speakers in the hangar. "This isn't my code," I stated, my eyes wide, tracing the malignant corruption spreading like wildfire. "Someone else is in the system. They are initiating a purge." The strategist took a step closer, his voice devoid of emotion. "Indeed, user TM. Contingency." This wasn't an external attack. This was an internal collapse, a systemic failure triggered from within the very network I had breached. The Chrysalis Protocol. It wasn't just data extraction, it was a detonation. The communications specialist, hunched over a different console monitoring external feeds, stiffened. A single brutal strike, a sickening crunch, and she crumpled, silent and still, against the console. I was no longer a hacker. I was a scapegoat, trapped in a collapsing digital inferno, framed for a catastrophic failure I didn't orchestrate. The strategist now loomed over me, his face a mask of calculated betrayal. The Chrysalis protocol destroys all sensitive data and leaves a clear, undeniable digital signature of its activator. I am that signature. My mind raced, every circuit firing. The data I had managed to acquire, the partial transfer, the digital breadcrumbs of my entry, all would be overwritten, corrupted, twisted to point solely at me as the architect of destruction. My fingers, still hovering over the keyboard, instinctively began a different sequence, a desperate pre-programmed escape routine I had built for hypothetical emergencies, never truly believing I'd need it. The system is collapsing, I yelled, a feigned urgency in my voice, pushing myself back from the console. We need to extract immediately. The strategist hesitated, his gaze briefly flicking to the enforcer. That was all I needed. A single, precise keystroke. A screech of tortured metal echoed as a hidden panel in the floor. A maintenance access hatch I'd spotted upon arrival slid open with a jolt. "He's escaping!" the strategist roared, his voice cutting through the sudden gloom. I scrambled, dropping into the narrow, dusty passage beneath the floorboards, the stench of stale concrete and oil filling my nostrils. Above me, I heard the heavy thud of the enforcer's boots, a shout, and then the sharp crack of a weapon firing, the bullet tearing into the metal above my head. I crawled, propelled by pure adrenaline, the image of the lifeless communications specialist seared into my mind. They would kill me without a second thought. The passage was a crude conduit, leading away from the hangar's main floor towards the perimeter fence. I could hear the rising clamor from the hangar, the strategist's furious commands, the frantic beeping of failing systems. A final, piercing shriek from the network speakers indicated total digital meltdown. I was framed, a ghost in a machine that no longer existed, a murderer's pawn. My escape was not a victory, but merely a postponement of the inevitable. I was alone, hunted, and now undeniably a criminal in their eyes. The screech of tortured metal was the sound of my escape, an ugly symphony to a world suddenly devoid of light. The hangar plunged into a chaotic void, crimson alarms strobing a frantic rhythm against the emergency exit signs. My fingers, still tingling from the precise keystroke, had not merely killed the main power. They had overloaded a secondary circuit, jamming the heavy, reinforced door to the service tunnel that ran beneath the private airstrip in remote location. Adrenaline, sharp and alien, coursed through me, a bitter counterpoint to the quiet hum of my intellect. This was not a world I knew. My domain was data streams, not desperate flight. But the enforcer's roar, the strategist's sharp command echoing through the sudden gloom, spurred me onward. My legs, unaccustomed to such frantic exertion, churned, propelling me into the narrow, dust-choked tunnel. The air, thick with the scent of stale concrete and machine oil, scratched at my throat. I could hear them, a frantic scrambling behind me, the strategist's clipped voice directing the enforcer, a low growl of frustration. We're fast, but I had a head start and the element of surprise. My world had always been one of abstract threats, of digital phantoms. Now the threat was flesh and blood, thudding footsteps closing in. I pushed harder, the small, high-capacity drive clutched in my sweating palm, a tiny universe of stolen secrets. The tunnel spat me out onto a windswept gravel track, miles from any recognizable road. The night sky, a vast, indifferent canvas, offered no comfort, only the stark silhouette of distant, jagged peaks. The biting wind whipped at my light jacket, and the chill seeped into my bones. My lungs burned, each ragged breath a testament to my physical ineptitude. But my mind, sharp as ever, was already racing, analyzing possibilities, calculating probabilities of survival. I was a digital being trapped in a meat suit, forced to navigate a landscape I'd only ever seen through satellite imagery. Hours later, the sun a pale, anemic smear on the horizon, I found a derelict hunting cabin, its windows shattered, its door hanging by a single rusted hinge. It was a squalid haven, smelling of damp earth and decay, but it offered four walls and a semblance of concealment. My hands, smudged with dirt and a faint tremor, still clung to my burner phone and the compact drive. My original devices, my comfortable digital extensions, were long gone, likely already being forensically scoured. I powered on the burner, its cheap plastic feeling alien in my hands. No network. Not surprising, given the desolate surroundings. I walked a mile, perhaps two, up a faint game trail, searching for a single bar of signal, a digital lifeline. Finally, perched on a rock overlooking a vast, empty valley, the phone flickered to life. A single, unstable bar. Enough. My fingers, usually dancing across a bespoke keyboard, felt clumsy on the small screen. I accessed the encrypted files on the drive, the data I had been blackmailed into stealing. My mission, as I understood it, was to extract financial records, a specific ledger from Ethelred Corp's supposedly impenetrable network. The strategist had been meticulous in his instructions, detailing the exact server, the specific directory, the precise file name. The files were larger than anticipated for mere financial ledgers, and the file names, while outwardly innocuous, Project Cerberus Budget V4, XLSX, Athena Initiative Asset Allocation, PDF seemed too grand, too mythological for a simple corporate balance sheet. The archive slowly unfolded. My eyes, accustomed to lines of code and data matrices, scanned the contents. My breath hitched. This was not what I expected, not financial records, not even close. Instead, a cascade of high-resolution schematics bloomed across the tiny screen. Intricate, multi-layered blueprints for massive, subterranean structures. They depicted vast, reinforced chambers, complex ventilation systems, and power conduits designed for colossal energy loads. There were detailed diagrams of server racks, yes, but unlike any commercial-grade hardware I had ever seen. These were custom-built, hardened units, designed for extreme conditions and unfathomable processing power, integrated with a secure, proprietary network architecture that spoke of isolation and absolute control. Then, the communication logs, encrypted but partially decoded by my custom script. They referenced locations not on any public map, using alphanumeric designators instead of city names. My mind, a precision instrument, began to connect the disparate threads, the sheer scale of these subterranean facilities. The unique hardened server designs, the cryptic communications. This wasn't about stealing data. This wasn't about financial leverage. This was about something far, far grander and infinitely more sinister. Ethelred Corp, the supposed data management giant, was a front. The data I had been coerced into stealing, the financial records, was a Trojan horse, a decoy to blind me to the true nature of their operations. The target wasn't the data itself. It was the act of access, the triggering of something else, or perhaps merely a test of my capabilities. I was a pawn deployed to breach a system, not for the information I extracted, but for the opening I created. They had used me. Used my intellect, my unique skills, to further an agenda I was only now beginning to comprehend. An agenda that involved hidden complexes and clandestine operations, far removed from the sterile world of corporate finance. The wind howled around me, carrying the faint, distant drone of an engine. A vehicle, they were hunting me. My brief moment of intellectual triumph dissolved into raw urgency. The game had changed. I was no longer merely a blackmailed architect. I was a fugitive with a terrible secret, trapped in a wilderness both digital and physical, determined to unearth Ethelred Corp's true, monstrous nature. And somehow, despite the odds, I knew I would. My fingers, still tingling from the precise keystroke, had not merely killed the power grid to a single hanger, but initiated a cascading system failure, a digital virus burrowing deep into the very heart of the private airstrip in remote location. A calculated risk, a desperate gambit to buy myself minutes, perhaps an hour, in this sprawling, steel-and concrete beast. The air, thick with the metallic tang of ozone and the distant shouts of confused security, pressed against me. My breath hitched, a shallow, ragged thing in my chest. I moved, a shadow among shadows, guided by the memory of floor plans I'd meticulously memorized, even as the world around me dissolved into a strobe-lit nightmare. Each thud of my boots on the concrete floor echoed like a drumbeat of my own frantic pulse. I needed more than escape. I needed answers. The data I was blackmailed into stealing felt like a phantom limb, an echo of a crime I'd been forced to commit. Now I sought the truth behind the curtain. My destination was the main control tower, a glass eye overlooking the desolate expanse of the airstrip. It was the brain, the central nervous system, and in its disarray I hoped to find its secrets laid bare. I navigated service tunnels, the air stale and heavy, the distant hum of emergency generators a low thrumming beneath my feet. The alarms were a constant, shrill companion, a siren song of my own making. Reaching the tower's base, I found a maintenance hatch, its electronic lock now inert, a casualty of my digital sabotage. The control room, when I finally breached it, was a tableau of abandoned screens, their data feeds frozen or flickering erratically. A single workstation, its console still humming with residual power, offered a sliver of hope. I bypassed the login protocols, a ghost in the machine, and began sifting through the digital debris. The initial data I'd been ordered to extract was merely a key, I realized, a master blueprint for a far grander, more sinister design. Ethelred Corp, I now saw, was not merely interested in market manipulation. The files I unearthed spoke of autonomous logistics platforms and remote resource management solutions. But beneath the sanitized corporate jargon, the truth began to bleed through. There were schematics for drone swarms, not for delivery but for precision targeting. Flight logs detailed routes over contested territories, not for humanitarian aid but for surveillance and disruption. They were merchants of war, cloaked in the guise of technological innovation. My stomach churned, a bitter bile rising in my throat. I had been an unwitting accomplice to something far more heinous than I could have imagined. Then a name appeared, repeated across encrypted communications and internal directives: the Architect. Not a code name for a project, but a title, always associated with the most sensitive, most destructive initiatives. I tracked its digital footprint, following a breadcrumb trail of access logs and authorization codes. It was a director of global operations, a man whose polished public image graced the covers of business magazines. Elias Thorne. He was the one who had orchestrated my blackmail, the puppet master pulling my strings, using my skills to build his empire of manufactured conflict. As I delved deeper, a peculiar anomaly surfaced. A series of heavily encrypted messages, tucked away in a rarely accessed server partition, caught my eye. They were internal, sent from an anonymous account within Ethelred, addressed to no one specific, yet filled with coded warnings and fragments of evidence. The Watcher, the sender, identified themselves. They spoke of Thorne's true agenda of unethical deployment and of a network of complicit actors. This wasn't just a corporation, it was a cabal. One message, timestamped just hours before my arrival, contained a desperate plea: he knows I'm close. The data is on a secure drive, labeled Orion, hidden in Sublevel 3. If you find this, expose him. A spark ignited within me, a flicker of something beyond fear and anger. A reluctant ally, a ghost in the machine, had been trying to fight Thorne from within. The Orion drive, Sublevel 3. The private airstrip in remote location held more than just answers. It held another victim, another soul caught in Thorne's web. My mission had shifted. It was no longer just about survival. It was about dismantling this monstrous edifice, piece by painstaking piece, and perhaps offering a lifeline to a desperate, unseen hand. The crimson alarms still pulsed, but now a new resolve beat in time with their frantic rhythm. The screech of tortured metal had been the sound of my escape, an ugly symphony to a world suddenly devoid of light. The hangar plunged into a chaotic void, crimson alarms strobing a frantic rhythm against the emergency exit signs, painting the fleeing shadows in arterial hues. My fingers, still tingling from the precise keystroke, had not merely killed the power. They had severed a nerve, plunged a blade into the very heart of their secure perimeter. Adrenaline, a bitter metallic taste, was my only companion as I navigated the pandemonium, a ghost in the machine's sudden blindness. I found a service vehicle, an unmarked utility van humming with surprising readiness, its keys dangling like a forgotten promise. The drive was a blur of gravel roads and starless sky, the vehicle's tires spitting dust as I pushed it beyond its intended limits. Each mile was a thread spun from defiance, pulling me further from the gilded cage and closer to a confrontation I both craved and dreaded. The air grew thinner, the landscape more desolate, until the vehicle finally shuddered to a halt on the edge of a vast, flat expanse. Before me lay a private airstrip in a remote location, a ribbon of cracked asphalt unfurling under a sky the color of bruised plums. A single, aging, twin-engine propeller plane sat like a forgotten toy at the far end, its metallic skin reflecting the nascent glow of a distant dawn. Near it, a figure stood silhouetted against the emerging light, a solitary sentinel. My heart, a drum against my ribs, beat a frantic rhythm. He stood with an unnerving stillness, a predator waiting for its prey, a little more dramatic than anticipated. His gaze, even from this distance, felt like a physical pressure, assessing, calculating. Dramatic was the only option left, I countered, my voice steadier than I felt. I pushed me into a corner. Now I need answers, all of them. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Answers are expensive, especially the kind I seek. He shifted his weight, and I noticed his right hand, casually tucked into the pocket of his trench coat. A subtle, almost imperceptible movement, but my senses were heightened, tuned to every flicker of deception. The wind picked up, whipping strands of hair across my face, momentarily obscuring my vision. "The price has already been paid," I said, my voice hardening. My life, my reputation, my peace of mind, what more do I want? Just my continued cooperation, he replied, a smirk playing on his lips. And the data, I have it. I have something far more valuable, I stated, drawing a small encrypted drive from my pocket. It wasn't the data he expected, but a key to it, a proof of concept. I have the proof that I can navigate their systems, that I can shatter their illusions of invulnerability, but I need to know who the architect of this whole scheme is. The real asterisk architect, and what exactly they are trying to achieve. His eyes narrowed, flicking between my face and the drive. Bold user TM, very bold. He took a step forward, his hand still concealed. Event. As he advanced, I saw the subtle bulge beneath his coat, the telltale outline of a compact firearm. It was a fleeting glimpse, but enough. My muscles tensed, ready to spring, to dive, to do anything but stand still. Don't, I warned, my voice a low growl. You try anything and this drive becomes a paperweight, and everything I know, everything I've seen goes to the highest bidder. He froze, his hand still in his pocket, the smirk fading into a grim line. Always the dramatist, he sighed, the tension in his shoulders easing ever so slightly. All right, no theatrics, you have my attention. He pulled his hand from his pocket, empty, raising it in a gesture of reluctant surrender. The mastermind, he calls himself the curator, not a man of flesh and blood, not in the traditional sense. He's a digital entity, a ghost in the machine, orchestrating everything from a network of servers hidden beneath a shell corporation in Zurich. His goal isn't just data, user TM, it's control. Ultimately execute his designs without leaving a trace. The data you were tasked to acquire, it was the final piece of his economic model, the last variable needed to predict and control the stock market's every fluctuation for the next decade. He then pulled a small, innocuous-looking USB stick from an inner pocket, tossing it towards me. It landed with a soft thud at my feet. That contains the server addresses, the key access protocols, and a backdoor to his primary operating system. Consider it. Severance pay, a digital twin, a ghost controlling reality. The sheer audacity of it left me momentarily breathless. This wasn't just corporate espionage, it was an attempt at global puppetry. My mind, a whirlwind of algorithms and firewalls, began to churn. The data on the drive in my hand, coupled with this new access, painted a terrifyingly complete picture. He wasn't just stealing information, he was rewriting the future. But a ghost, no matter how powerful, still needed a machine to haunt, and machines had vulnerabilities. The handler watched me, a flicker of fear in his eyes. He knew, he understood what I was capable of. My plan, born in the frigid pre-dawn air, began to crystallize. It was audacious, reckless, a digital kamikaze mission. I couldn't simply expose him, he was too deeply embedded, too diffuse. I had to make him visible, force him into the light, even if it meant risking everything. I would leverage the very infrastructure he sought to control, using his own digital twin against him. I would not just interrupt his operations. I would hijack them, broadcast his every move, every illicit bite, every manipulated truth to the entire world. I would turn his silent, invisible control into a cacophony of undeniable evidence, flooding the global networks with his crimes. The private airstrip in this remote location, once a place of tense negotiation, was now the launch pad for a desperate final assault. The plane waited, a silent accomplice to the coming storm. I had the keys to the kingdom, and I was about to burn it down. The wind, a frigid whisper carrying the scent of jet fuel and distant pine, clawed at my jacket on the private airstrip in this remote location. The twin-engine jet, sleek and predatory, hummed with a dormant power, its silver skin reflecting the bruised twilight sky. My hand, despite the chill, was slick with a nervous sweat, the USB stick a small, cold anchor in my palm. It wasn't just a data repository, it was a digital grenade, primed to shatter the elaborate deceit that had nearly consumed me. I climbed the boarding steps, each ascent a commitment, a shedding of the reclusive shell I had worn for so long. Inside, the cabin was a blend of luxury and sterile efficiency. This was where the final act would unfold. My fingers, surprisingly steady, plunged the USB into the port. The screen flickered, then bloomed with a cascade of code, not the familiar architecture of my own design, but a volatile script I had woven in secret. This wasn't merely stealing data from Ethelred Corp. This was a surgical strike, designed to invert their power, to turn their own sophisticated network against them. My counterplan, born of sleepless nights and a desperation I'd never known, was now in motion. The initial phase was a silent infiltration, a digital ghost slipping through firewalls designed to be impenetrable. A faint smile touched my lips, a grim satisfaction. The data I was supposed to steal, the very payload of their blackmail, was now a poisoned chalice. My code wasn't just extracting. It was duplicating, encrypting, and then with a pre-programmed delay broadcasting. Not to some anonymous hacker forum, but to a curated list of international regulatory bodies, investigative journalists, and even a few rival corporate entities known for their insatiable hunger for leverage. A sudden click of the cabin door, sharp and intrusive, shattered my focus. I spun, hand instinctively tightening on the edge of the terminal. His usually placid features were drawn tight, a mask of controlled fury. A faint tremor ran through me, a primal fear. It was quickly overshadowed by a surge of defiant resolve. User TM, his voice was a low growl devoid of its usual polished cadence. I underestimated I did, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. I assumed my only skill was compliance. He stepped further into the cabin, his gaze sweeping over the glowing screen. Your grand scheme to corner the global energy market through illicit data acquisition. Exposed. He lunged, a sudden, desperate movement. I was ready. My years of hunched over keyboards had not prepared me for a physical confrontation, yet the adrenaline coursing through my veins lent me an unexpected agility. I ducked, pushing back from the table, my chair scraping loudly. He stumbled, catching himself on the armrest of a passenger seat. Fool, he snarled, straightening. Do you truly believe you can bring down an organization of our magnitude with a simple digital stunt? It's not simple, I countered, my eyes darting to the progress bar on the screen. It was moving slowly, relentlessly. It's a multi-layered counteroffensive. The initial broadcast is just the trigger. My code is designed to activate dormant backdoors within your own systems, ones you never even knew existed, planted by your own architects over the years, awaiting a master key. It will turn your data against you, corrupting vital operational files, crippling your infrastructure from within. His face contorted, a vein throbbing visibly at his temple. You modified the original payload, the data. It was designed to be innocuous. Innocuous data is a lie. I explained, the words flowing with a surprising confidence. I saw the patterns in the data you wanted me to steal, the subtle anomalies, the financial projections that made no sense for legitimate operations. I traced the money flows, the shell corporations, the phantom acquisitions. The architect of this entire deception, the one pulling your strings, isn't just a faceless board member, his eyes widening. I know. The impossible heist I blackmailed me into was merely a diversion. A way to compromise a rival, yes, but more importantly, a smoke screen to mask the true, deeper attack I planned against another target. A target whose demise would consolidate unprecedented power in the hands of Ethelred's true architect. His silence was deafening, a testament to the truth of my words. The director, for all his bluster, was merely a pawn in a larger game. He was trapped, cornered by his own hubris. He surged forward again, this time with a primal roar aiming for my throat. I sidestepped, my left hand sweeping across the table, knocking the terminal to the floor. It was already out there, a digital echo racing across fiber optic cables, reverberating through satellites. He grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. I cannot undo this, user TM. Perhaps not, I gasped, struggling against his strength. But I've ensured that Ethelred Corp will unravel. The truth, once unleashed, cannot be contained. My gaze flickered to the plane's emergency exit lever. A desperate thought, a final gambit. I pulled, and with a hiss of hydraulics, the hatch began to slide open, revealing the wind-whipped expanse of the private airstrip in this remote location. A guttural roar swallowed the confined space, a hungry beast unleashed. The plane's emergency exit, now a gaping maw, sucked at the cabin's air with violent intent. My arm, still clamped around the lever, vibrated with the sudden, terrible power of the rushing wind. The blackmailer, momentarily stunned by my desperate gambit, staggered, his grip on me faltering. I fool, he screamed, his voice shredded by the gale. I'll kill us both. His words were a distant echo against the hurricane tearing through the fuselage. My eyes, wide with a terror that was swiftly hardening into a desperate resolve, met his. The cabin lights flickered, casting us in a strobe of frantic shadows. The plane bucked, a metallic groan tearing through its frame. He lunged, a desperate attempt to regain control to close the hatch, but the sudden vacuum had already claimed its first victim, his balance. I pushed, a surge of adrenaline lending me a strength I didn't know I possessed. It wasn't a calculated move, but an instinct, a primal shove against the force that had sought to crush me. The force of his departure, coupled with the plane's violent lurch, threw me backwards, slamming my head against the bulkhead. Stars exploded behind my eyes, and a wave of nausea washed over me. The cabin was a maelstrom of loose papers and debris, the roar of the wind an unbearable symphony of chaos. I scrambled, gasping, pulling myself towards the nearest seat, fumbling for a belt, anything to anchor myself. The plane was a wounded bird, plummeting. The pilot, a silent, unseen struggle, fought valiantly against the sudden imbalance. My ears popped, a searing pain, as the aircraft dropped through the air. Each shuddering tremor resonated through my bones, a grim countdown. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact, the metallic tang of fear sharp on my tongue. Then a sickening lurch, a jarring scrape, and the world spun. The roar outside softened, replaced by the screech of metal on asphalt. We skidded, a violent, uncontrolled dance before finally grinding to a halt. I lay there, strapped into the seat, my body aching, my mind a jumble of fragmented images. Slowly, cautiously, I unbuckled myself. We had landed, or rather crashed, at the private airstrip in remote location. Emergency lights, a constellation of red and blue, pulsed in the distance, growing steadily brighter. Footsteps crunched on the tarmac, urgent and numerous. My heart, a frantic drum against my ribs, finally began to slow. A woman in a tailored suit, his expression sharp and assessing, was the first to reach me. "User TM?" he asked, his voice calm amidst the lingering tension. He was the detective, the one I had tried to reach, the one I had hoped would understand. I nodded, my throat dry. "The data. It's out there," I rasped, my voice hoarse. "Everything, Ethelred Corp, the blackmailer, he was the architect of it all, the murders, the theft, the manipulation." She surveyed the damaged plane, her gaze lingering on the open hatch, then back to me. "We know, my last transmission. It was fragmented, but enough. The data stream I initiated, the one designed to self-destruct if not accessed within a specific window, it landed on our servers. A digital breadcrumb trail leading right to them. Relief, potent and dizzying, washed over me. My desperate last-ditch effort had worked. The truth, like a torrent, was finally unleashed. Over the next few hours in the makeshift command center set up in a nearby hangar, I recounted the harrowing tale. My voice grew stronger with each detail, each piece of the puzzle falling into place. The detective listened, her gaze unwavering, occasionally interjecting with precise questions. She confirmed the scope of Ethelred Corp's illicit operations, the depth of their reach, the network of corruption I had inadvertently stumbled into. The blackmailer, he explained, was one of their key enforcers, his body later found miles from the airstrip, a grim testament to the speed and height of his fall. "My actions, User TM," the detective stated, leaning forward, "while unorthodox, led to the exposure of a vast criminal enterprise. We've already initiated arrests. The entire structure is unraveling." I looked at my hands, once only familiar with the cool precision of a keyboard, now bearing the faint tremors of adrenaline and exhaustion. The fear was still a ghost in my periphery, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was a memory, a scar. The world outside my screens, once a distant, abstract concept, now felt intensely real, sharp with danger and vibrant with the unexpected capacity for courage. The quiet hum of my servers, the sanctuary of my apartment, seemed a lifetime away. I had been forced from my comfort zone, not just into a fight for survival, but into a confrontation with myself. I had found a resilience I never knew I possessed, a willingness to act, to fight even when terrified. The detective offered me a choice: anonymity, a new identity, or a chance to use my unique skills to help dismantle similar threats, to become an architect of defense rather than just a builder of systems. I gazed out at the private airstrip in remote location, the rising sun painting the horizon in hues of orange and violet. The plane, a mangled wreck, was a stark reminder of how close I had come to oblivion. My old life, a meticulously coded fortress of solitude, was shattered. But in its place, something new had begun to emerge, something forged in fire and fear, yet imbued with an unexpected strength. I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs, a promise of a new beginning. "I think," I said, turning back to the detective, a faint smile touching my lips, "I've had enough of hiding." The quiet hum of my future, unwritten yet, felt like an open road stretching out into the vast, unpredictable world. And this time I was ready to walk it.